After the release of Aliens, 1986, Dark Horse Comics published 3 series that were a direct sequel to the movie. They followed the lives of Hicks, Newt, and Ripley directly after the movie. However, the comics were retconned after the release of subsequent sequels to the movie. To combat this continuity error, the names and appearances of the characters were changed in the later issues. But in this video, we will be covering the original series and take a look at the lives of these beloved characters and what supposedly happened in this timeline of the universe. Oh, and before I begin, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of the marvelous long reads. And now, let's begin. Aliens, 1988, issue number 1 and Aftermath. It has been 10 years since the events on LV-426, 10 years since the destruction of Hadley's Hope. Newt is now 18 years old. She has grown up a lot, but is currently housed in Fieldcrest Home, which is a psychiatric institution. Anybody would be traumatized after what happened 10 years ago, but Newt seems to be taking it the worst. She is currently strapped to a futuristic gurney and is being implored by her doctor to talk about what happened last night. Newt begins to reluctantly narrate the event, and we learn that she and her friends decided to try camping after Carly found an old disc about it. It talked about how people used to camp and have fun in the old days, sit around a fire, tell stories, eat s'mores, that kind of stuff. They borrowed a crawler and drove to one of the remote generator buildings. Then, while using a heater as a makeshift fire, they sat down to camp like people used to before. Newt expresses that, in hindsight, this was one of the best moments for her. She loved being away from the colony and the machines, just her and her friends, all alone. They then begin discussing what else Carly found on the disc, and she tells them that people would tell scary stories around the campfire once it was dark, and this began their night of scary tales. Carly started by telling them a haunting story about vampires, witches, and monsters, and this scared them all 3 to death. But these friends weren't done yet, because after Carly, it was Newt's turn to tell a scary story. And though Newt tried to back out, tried to tell them a story about witches, the girls wanted to hear about her past experience as a child. They wanted to hear about the true horror that lies out there, waiting in space. Newt began to get annoyed and frustrated. All she wanted to do was go back, to go home and forget the horror that still haunts her. But when her friends did not let up, she began to tell them about the monsters in space. Monsters made of teeth and blades. Monsters that live to feed and hate. She tells them about their acid blood, their skin as hard as steel, and their hunger to procreate and kill. She tells them about the horrors of being ambushed by one of these monsters. She tells them how one would wish the horror to end with death, but that is not what happens. The monsters use your body to breed, to burrow under the tissue, to spread like cancer, and to take over like a parasite. This is when the other girls began to panic, and before Newt knew it, Mag was on the ground writhing in pain as a chestburster sprouted from her torso. Newt began to scream and writhe, and this is when she was found by one of the orderlies of the facility. She was dreaming again, something her doctor seems to know about, something that seems to happen to Newt a lot. Her doctor loosens her straps, and we see that she isn't exactly getting the treatment that would help her current condition. Newt knows that nothing will stop these dreams, and there's someone like her who is haunted as well. This is Hicks' dream, and he is once again back on LV-426 with Newt in his arms and his team following his orders. He remembers being resolute for the first time, ordering his men as though he knew what he was doing, but Hicks soon found out the true horrors of facing off against xenomorphs. They fought relentlessly before eventually making their way to the generator room. Hicks remembers Crow promising to buy him a refinery once they got out of this mess. He remembers discovering his crew's bodies with their torsos split open. He then remembers being all alone in that moment as he discovered what happened to Frost once he found him trapped in the ship's walls. Hicks then wakes up from his nightmare and is quickly hounded by a droid named Perkins, a guard robot who also happens to be his superior. Their conversation and the reaction of his roommate tell us that Hicks has been stigmatized by his peers ever since the incident on LV-426. Despite having been cleared, they all think Hicks is somehow infected, and most of them refuse to interact with him. Perkins, meanwhile, hands him a disc and asks him to report to Colonel Stevens at MYLCOMHQ once he has caught up on the material, and this is all Hicks needed to know. Men like him don't have friends in high places, and if he was being summoned by someone high, it meant that they wanted him badly. When Hicks boots up the disc, He is greeted by the footage of a derelict vessel called the Junkit. Hicks ponders the irony of the Coast Guard still being named as such despite now being stationed in space. He also tells us how companies like to abandon derelict ships in orbit rather than repair or scrap them, which is more expensive. Nobody batted an eye at this initially. After all, the ship would eventually re-enter the atmosphere and gravity, and the atmosphere would do its job for them. That is, until one of the ships crashed in Hawaii, the radiation killed the indigenous population, and the fallout rendered the entire area useless. Now, the Coast Guard ship named the Dutton approaches Junkit in the footage as Hicks tells us that the Coast Guard's new job is to tag and blast away these abandoned floaters before another incident like Hawaii happens on Earth. The men piloting the Dutton soon send a probe to scout the Junkit as a formality, but what they find only increases their curiosity. Dented blast doors, as if someone or something was trying to get out, abandoned and mangled bodies, which the men think have been caused by the sudden depreciation of the cabin. They also find the words "kill us all" written in blood, but one of them chalks it up to a mental disorder, likely plaguing one of the men aboard the abandoned ship. This is when the man operating the drone gets an alert on one of the motion sensors. As he investigates, he spots huge holes in the floor and the ceiling, as if acid had burned right through the ship. This is when his partner informs him that they need to blow up the ship before it enters the atmosphere, and this is when they are jump scared by an automaton suddenly coming to life. His partner forces him to pull the trigger and let go of his curiosity, and 4 minutes later, they blow up the ship after downloading all retrievable data. However, after the explosion, as they direct the drone back towards their own ship, they notice that it is unusually sluggish, and by the time they realise why that is, it's already too late. A menacing Xenomorph awaits them right outside the airlock, and it seems to have hitched a ride on their drone. The men panic. One of them is in awe of the creature, while the other is desperately contacting their home base. By the time they realise that the creature is hostile, it's already too late. The Xenomorph bursts in through the blast doors and kills one of them before he can put on his pressure suit. This is when we switch back to Hicks, who is now smoking in his room as he tells us that he knew this was bound to happen sooner or later. The creature was bound to return. The Marines knew it too, and it's the reason why they haven't fired him yet. We then see the Xenomorph murdering the first man, feasting on his flesh, and then killing the second one using its inner jaw. However, this was the end of it, because probe ships were designed to self-destruct upon a hull breach, and thus the creature was destroyed when the vessel imploded. Meanwhile, in an unknown building, a technician meets up with a mysterious preacher named Salvahay. This is an alternate timeline to ours, and thus, this is when we are informed that the TV technology transformed very differently from ours. By the 90s, TVs were offering over 5,000 channels, and it thus became economically infeasible for advertisers to support mainstream dramatic programming, and this is when religious programming saw a resurgence. And as we are informed this, we see the annoyed technician reluctantly put together a broadcasting setup for Salvahay using what to them is ancient technology. And as Salvahay continues to boast that his is the one true cause, we see that he prays to the hologram of a Xenomorph, who, according to him, is the one true Messiah. As the technician gets ready to start the broadcast, we learn that during the 90s, viewer perception changed. Fast-cut advertisements took over, which started from 5 seconds and eventually ended up being 2 seconds long. With 5,000 channels competing for people's attention, the iBox was invented, an automated channel switcher based on the minute changes in the capillaries of the retina. This forced the programmers to devise new styles of programming that wouldn't trip the iBox. And as we are told this, we see that Salvahay seems to be having visions about the Xenomorphs, and he believes that others around the world are having them too, which is why broadcasting his message is paramount. The technician, on the other hand, isn't impressed. He encounters religious fanatics like Salvahay on a daily basis, but the sight of the Xenomorph sends shivers down his spine. Newt, meanwhile, meets up with her friend Carly for dinner in the cafeteria. However, her condition seems to be deteriorating because she ends up dropping her plate while trying to sit at the table. Their friend Dee Dee Dee, meanwhile, is busy watching TV while an eye box is aimed at her retina, and this is when we see her consuming one of the religious programs. Newt and Carly's conversation tells us that because the Fieldcrest home doesn't know how to treat her, they use sedatives as a crutch. Whenever something happens to her, bad dreams or an outburst, they sedate her, and this seems to be taking its toll. As Carly feeds Newt, her ramblings tell us that she is losing hope. All the while, Dee Dee continues to consume the program, which seems happy and dandy at first. However, that is until the preacher pulls out a revolver and shoots directly at the camera. This seems to be in conjunction with Newt, who seems to be spiralling with every passing second. She knows the doctors here can't treat her, and she knows that they are just pretending to fix her. Carly tries to tell her to calm down because if the orderlies hear this, she would be in more trouble. However, this is when Newt smacks her dinner plate away and screams that she didn't wish to be born on level 426. She didn't wish to go through all that she did and lose her parents. The plate hits Carly in the face, and this is when the orderlies jump in to restrain Newt. As this happens, we see Dee Dee's eye box switch the channel, and this is when she begins to consume Salvahay's program, his church, which he has aptly named the Church of Immaculate Incubation. Newt, meanwhile, continues to scream about the Xenomorph and how they are still out there, and this is when Carly, too, is captivated by Salvahay's program as the image of the Xenomorph is shown on the screen. This is when we catch up with Hicks again, as he shows up for his meeting with Colonel Stevens the next day. His narration tells us that at first, when Hicks had joined the Marines, he had a sense of patriotism, and he had bought into all the propaganda that the Marines had advertised. However, he soon ended up discovering that the Marines were just like any other private organisation, and being rich had its perks. Take Colonel Stevens, for example. The man has zero combat experience, yet today he gets to question and order Hicks around. We see that everyone in the Marines is wary of Hicks, even Stevens' secretary. They all think that he is still carrying around some sort of infection that he contracted on LV-426. When Hicks enters Stevens' office, we see that he isn't alone. He is joined by Dr. Arona, who is quite forthcoming with his questions, while Stephen is desperately trying to establish his authority. After confirming that Hicks has seen the footage from Dutton, Arona asks him about his past experience with the Xenomorph, and this is when we see Hicks' face for the first time. The left side of his face is completely mangled with burn scars covering most of it, and the next page shows us how this happened as he tells Arona and Stevens his story. We see Hicks and his team arriving on LV-426. We see them cautiously scouring the facility until they are eventually ambushed and attacked by the Xenomorphs. We see Hicks getting his face burned by the acid as he blasts away one of them at close range, and this is when he tells Arona and Stephen that, apart from him, Ripley and Newt, no one else survived the ordeal. This is when Arona demeans Hicks by bringing up his record after he survived LV-426. Hicks had a spotless and stellar record before the incident, but ever since coming back, he has had numerous transgressions. This annoys Hicks. His record was never supposed to be a part of this conversation, and seeing this, Arona orders Colonel Stevens to wait outside so that he can talk to the corporal on his own terms. Once Stevens is gone, Arona approaches Hicks much more casually. He introduces himself and then begins to go over Hicks's record ever since his return. Through the review, we learn that Hicks was partly stigmatized by his peers due to his disfigured face, and partly because he was kept in quarantine for months upon his return. They were looking for any remnants of the alien spores, and the fact that Hicks had no visitors during these months tells Arona a lot about his life. We then see Hicks being isolated by his peers, and he handled this situation quite badly. He was regularly reprimanded for drunk and disorderly conduct. He regularly got into brawls, and he regularly picked fights with his seniors. Hicks is getting annoyed with each passing second, but to Arona, this pattern of self-destructive behaviour is an asset. The doctor tells Hicks that he is a geneticist, and they have managed to retrieve the junkit's entire travel log before the Coast Guards blew the ship up. Hicks seeks redemption, and Arona can help get him that, because he, in turn, seeks to acquire a specimen. Newt, meanwhile, is sleeping, dreaming of xenomorphs, dreaming of getting attacked by them, and due to her sedatives, her dreams are amalgamating, not whole and transforming into one another. And as she dreams, we see her doctors discussing her condition, discussing how they might have to up the dosage even if it risks Newt having permanent brain damage. However, this is when Newt is suddenly woken up because, for the first time in years, she has a visitor. Newt is led to the meeting room by her friend Sash, but before the meeting begins, she is warned by one of the nurses against revealing any information about her treatment at the facility. The conversation will be monitored, and if she breaks any rules, all her privileges at the facility will be suspended. Once Newt has understood the warnings, her visitor is let in, and to her surprise, it is none other than Hicks. Hicks greets her, apologizes to her, and wishes there was someone else he could talk to, but there's no one else. Only Newt can understand him, because just like her, he too dreams about the aliens each night. As Newt grapples with this new information, Hicks informs her that he is going back out there to seek redemption because he has found the alien homeworld. Newt has seen a familiar face in years, and Hicks is now telling her that he is going out for redemption. How can she hold back? She throws all caution to the wind and begs Hicks to take her with him. When Hicks tries to back away, Newt laughs and then screams, "Can't you see? They're killing me. The drugs and the dreams. They're taking away my mind." Hicks tries to question her more, clearly concerned for her, but this is when two orderlies rush in and drag Newt away. As she is dragged away, Newt screams, "I don't want to die here, Hicks. Help me, please. You saved me once. Save me again." Hicks screams and pounds on the screen, but the hospital pays him no attention. He gets no answers from them, and as he screams Newt's name, the nurse informs him that visitation hours are over with a cold smile on her face. Aliens, 1988, issue number 2, Adapt and Survive. This issue starts with Newt's dreams, which are growing more and more delirious with each passing day. Newt is now reminded of her childhood, reminded of the song her mother used to sing to her, as she finally seems to be giving in to the drugs she is being fed on a daily basis. The images of xenomorphs and the aliens no longer scare her. She seems to be giving in, and in this one, she imagines herself in the womb while being surrounded by aliens. She tells us about her childhood, how her parents had hoped that LV-426 would be a new start for their family, and how the cold, lonely existence of life is simply chasing the once experienced feeling of being safe in the womb. We see Newt living the past over and over again as she lies in her bed in an almost catatonic state, no thanks to the drugs that she has been forcefully injected with. She sees the time her colony discovered alien eggs on LV-426 and how she was eventually rescued by the Marines. As she lies in her bed, she begins to hallucinate. She begins to imagine the particles of light from the ceiling engulfing her as she tells us that to others, space might be the new frontier, a world of untold riches and opportunity, but to her, it is the cold void of hell, one which might be her only escape from this place. This is when Newt screams, "Hicks, don't leave me!" at the top of her lungs, and this is when we see Hicks exiting a club while a woman chasing him says the same phrase. We then see Hicks drinking the night away, wondering about why he joined the Marines and convincing himself that leaving Newt behind was the best thing for her. This is his war. He needs to avenge his friends, and he needs to do this alone. Back at the Milcom headquarters, we see Stevens protesting to one of his seniors. He doesn't like Hicks and thinks that he is a loose cannon. Stevens thinks that he can spearhead the mission on his own, but the command from his higher-ups is clear. Hicks will be going whether Stevens likes it or not, and Stevens has to reluctantly give in. However, he takes his anger out on Hicks a few hours later when he finds a huge crate of plasma weapons being boarded on the Benedict, which is supposed to be their vessel for the mission. Stevens summons Hicks to his office and then reprimands him for sourcing plasma weapons even though he was granted complete oversight of the mission. According to Stevens, plasma weapons are highly unstable, and though Hicks tries to convince him that they will need all the firepower at their disposal, Stevens vetoes his opinion and orders him to do away with the plasma weapons. Now, we are introduced to two men who will come to be known as Green and Red because they always wear suits of the respective colour. Green and Red are from LaSalle Bionational Corporation, and the two of them are currently playing Electro Ball, a tabletop holographic game that allows you to play games like squash and tennis from the comfort of your chair. The two discuss a man named Massey, who is their employee, and he has been performing tremendously lately. They then talk about their bio-warfare project, and this is when we learn that Bionational is looking to get their hands on a Xenomorph specimen before Milcom. They then discuss assigning Massey to the mission, and as they discuss his past, we see that he has a small family and seemingly lives a normal life. However, through their conversation, we learn that Massey is a sociopath. He has an MBA from Harvard and a doctorate from Cornell, yet when the time came, Massey enlisted in the Marines. He is a Silver Star and has a couple of hundred kills from the oil wars. Eventually, he was court-martialed for trying to kill his commanding officer after he was denied permission to attack a civilian establishment. Naturally, this is when Bionational swooped in and hired him immediately. We now catch up with Newt. Her dreams have gotten more vivid. She now seems to be one with her nightmares, because even as a Xenomorph devours her face, Newt is no longer scared of it. No, her delirium seems to be making her believe that her nightmares are the only thing keeping her company. The aliens are meant to be a part of her, and she has now begun to find them beautiful. Meanwhile, Hicks is simulating battle scenarios for the team that he has been assigned, and 2 soldiers from the team are currently trying to attack a bunker. One of them provides cover fire, while the other tries to open the service port with a well-placed explosion. The plan works. However, this is when one of them starts celebrating, which gets him shot in the chest. This is when Hicks appears and reprimands the soldier. He knows they are great at what they do, but out there, they can't let their guards down. The Xenomorphs are a different kind of enemy, and Hicks can't have his men slacking off. And after seeing how this scenario played out, Hicks orders his squad to continue training into the night until they finally understand the stakes. However, as they continue training, Hicks's narration tells us that he is quite impressed by his team. They are a cohesive unit, and they have been preparing for this mission for the past year. These men remind him of his Acheron team. However, this is when Hicks reminds himself that he needs to focus. His friends are dead, and this wasn't about duty or loyalty. This was about redemption. This was his own war, his war for revenge. That night, Newt is brought into the room to meet the 2 head doctors. Newt is naturally apprehensive of this situation, and when the doctors inform her that they have decided to operate on her, Newt's blood runs cold. They inform her that they will be using a laser scalpel to sever the part of her brain that is causing her nightmares, and though Newt begs them, tries to tell them she will be good from now on, the doctors have made their decision, and they aren't about to backtrack anytime soon. This conversation, however, is spied on by Hicks as well. For a Marine like him, hacking into the Fieldcrest facility wasn't exactly hard, and after witnessing this conversation, Hicks knew that it was now or never. So now, less than 12 hours away from the mission, Hicks goes off base and infiltrates the Fieldcrest facility. Security tries to stop him, but Hicks smacks the man away. He barges in through the front door, and when the receptionist tries to call in security, she realizes that Hicks has cut the communications to the entire facility, and after getting Newt's room number from the receptionist, he takes out another security guy before making his way there. He then picks up Newt, tells her that they are getting out of this place, and then begins to tinker with the nearby window. As he does this, his narration tells us that though he barricaded the ground floor and cut off the facility communications, security is bound to be circling the building by now, which is why he now has to adapt and improvise like he was taught. And so, just as the security officers catch up with him and shoot, we see Newt and Hicks escape the high-rise using the jet rescue technology, a technology that was developed to provide an easy and safe escape route for people stuck in high-rise buildings after the attack on the World Trade Center in 2024. Once the craft has stabilized, Hicks boards the cockpit with Newt, overrides the default trajectory and uses the emergency fuel in it to pilot them back to Milcom HQ. Upon reaching the Benedict, he boards the ship, uses his position to smuggle Newt on board, and then quickly puts her in a hypersleep pod. Newt's drugs are wearing off by now, and she is now coming to terms with the fact that they are going back in space, this time to willingly find the monsters that have haunted her for the past 10 years. The next day, Benedict takes off on the mission without a hitch, and though Hicks knows Newt's presence is going to be trouble, Stevens really won't be able to do much once they are a few light years away. Red and Green, meanwhile, exit a retro hologram show while discussing the latest tragic events in the life of Patrick Massey. They had sent a briefing document on the latest mission to the man. However, the top secret files on the Xenomorphs were viewed by his child and wife. Naturally, they tried to question him about it, and this is when Massey knew that his cover had been blown. An hour or so later, the police arrived at his residence in response to a seemingly attempted burglary. which resulted in the death of his family. In reality, Massey had orchestrated all of this to cover his tracks, to hide his mistakes, and to wipe all surviving witnesses. The mission for him is still on track, and this is when Red says, "I wonder how it feels being a sociopath. I mean, I would imagine it's quite liberating." And this is when we see the top secret file of Operation Outreach that was sent to Massey. And as the file details their plans, we see everything being executed in real time. The file contains detailed information about the Benedict, its crew, and how their own chase ship, K-014, will be taking off and following them as soon as they launch. The K-014's mission is twofold. First, they are to follow the Benedict to the aliens' homeworld and collect biological data on the life form. Second, they are to inhibit Benedict's crew from retrieving a viable test subject. Captain Massey has full-on oversight over this mission. We are then told that a pilot by the name of James Lekowski is in their custody. James had managed to use the eject pod before the junkit was abandoned. He is currently being studied by bionational scientists because he has a facehugger attached to him. Lekowski's pod was damaged, but the life form somehow ensured his survival. The military and scientific applications of this made the board of Bionational very excited. Aliens, 1988. Issue number 3, The Calling. This issue starts with an interview of Dr. Rayner with patient Herman. He seems to be in a suggestive state, dreaming, and he is currently on the subway with his mother in this vision. The man knows this is a dream because the cab is completely empty, and soon he begins to hear something or someone scraping against the metal. Dr. Rayner is indifferent as she continues to probe him, and soon we see the metal of the cab bending into various shapes as things from the outside begin to force their way in. It's the Xenomorphs, and they are beelining for Herman's mother, and by the time he manages to reach her, she has already been taken over. She laughs with a wicked smile, with sharp fangs, as Herman begs for reassurance that this is just a dream. The next page is an interview with patient Culp, who imagines himself in a dilapidated room, and when the TV turns on, the screen begins to bend, claws emerge from it, and they begin to pull him inside. Next is an interview with patient Duncan, who is currently on an airplane. Funnily enough, the stewardess in the aisle reminds him of his mother, and as soon as he has this thought, a chest burster emerges from her chest. Another interviewee named Lockwood recounts a nightmare where he was trapped in his childhood bed, screaming for his mother while being surrounded by xenomorphs. All these interviews are being reviewed by Arona in the present day, and he is fascinated by the presence of xenomorphs in all these dreams. All these reports are from within a 50-mile radius of their facility, and somehow the descriptions of the creatures are nearly identical in every one of them. After careful research and postulations from the psych department at Bionational, Arona has come to the conclusion that the creatures possess some form of telepathy. Of course, he doesn't believe that this is some sort of intelligent communication. No, Arona postulates that this might be some sort of genetic hereditary response. Moreover, these nightmares are random and confined to a specific geographic area, but somehow, despite Bionational keeping the existence of these creatures a top secret, people have begun to experience a sudden wave of spontaneous telepathic events. To him, the question is why, and why now, and especially why on Earth, all the while being completely oblivious to the fact that it might have something to do with his own experiments. We then catch up with James Lekowski, the pilot of the junket that had been infected by the facehugger. He is currently in a top-secret Bionational lab, and in his delirium, he is calling out for his mother. Doctors are monitoring his condition every step of the way, and they are quite excited to see the alien life form gestating in his body. As he comes back to his senses, Lekowski is reminded about who he is and where he is, but the man has only one question on his lips: why am I not dead yet? Sometime later, two high-ranking executives from the company, Horner and Ostro, were involved. They seem to be in charge of this program, and to them, Lekowski is worth $1 billion. The attendant monitoring Lekowski's condition firsthand informs them how the creature is lodged in the man's digestive tract and is currently surviving by drawing minimal fluids from his body. The three of them debate whether they should tell Lekowski what is happening to him, and despite the ethical implications of this program, they decide to go through with it because it is in the company's best interest. Horner and Ostro's conversation then reveals that their biological weapon was hinted at in a weapons expo by one of their executives, which has sent the company's share prices through the roof. Lekowski is somehow spying on this conversation, and when when he realizes that the creature's gestation period will likely be completed in the next 72 hours, he gets the shock of his life. We then catch up with Salvahay, who is up to his own horrid and deplorable antics. He has employed the services of a pregnant prostitute, yet all he wants to do is stare at her constantly, which is naturally weirding her out. When she asks him about it, Salvahay reveals that he wants to know what it's like to carry a life form. He wants her to tell him about it in excruciating detail. Meanwhile, the technician, Maris, who helps him broadcast his sermon over illegal channels, corners him sometime later and tells him that the government is onto them. A couple of them showed up to question him, and though Maris didn't tell them anything for his own sake, he has had it with Salvahay and his weird church. He has been working with shady individuals for years, but this is the first time someone has shown up on his doorstep. Whatever Salvahay's messiah is, Maris wants nothing to do with it. However, this is when Salvahay grabs Maris and smacks him away. He then hoists him up by his shirt and begins to ramble. "You're nothing! I'm nothing! We're only vessels here. Vessels to serve the true messiah. Don't be afraid. Look at him." Salvahay shoves Maris to his knees and then forces him to stare at the Xenomorph hologram in front of him. He then screams, "The broadcast will continue one way or the other. Don't be afraid of the government. Be afraid of me." Massey and his crew aboard the K-104 are closing on their mission, which is why he gathers his team in the conference room and briefs them on what they're supposed to do. They'll be boarding the Benedict from the number 1 aft lock. They will use low-level blasters to ensure that the hull isn't damaged. Once aboard, they will hold the crew prisoner until they arrive at the alien homeworld. Once there, they will use the crew as bait, purge the computers, and destroy the ship. Meanwhile, aboard the Benedict, Stevens is having an aneurysm now that Hicks has revealed Newt's presence to everyone. At first, Hicks is cordial. He doesn't offer any excuses and instead takes full responsibility for his transgression. But when Stevens continues to push him, Hicks angrily points out that the higher-ups would love to hear how Stevens, being the most senior aboard, failed to do a final count of his crew before takeoff. This ends the conversation abruptly, and Stevens warns Hicks that he'll have to answer for his transgression when they get back to Earth. And to this, Hicks replies, if we get back to Earth. The rest of the crew, meanwhile, seems quite happy to have Newt aboard the Benedict, and one man named Butler seems to be especially interested in her. One of the men, named Benson, then goes out for his regular patrol of the vessel. However, this is when he overhears someone transmitting their telemetry data and their ETA to the alien homeworld, K-104. Naturally, Benson is curious. However, when he tries to investigate while accusing the mysterious man of treachery, he promptly gets stabbed in the neck. The man then drags Benson's body to the nearby airlock, shoves it into a pressure suit, and after shoving a grenade into it, sends Benson flying into space. The control room raises the alarm and summons both Stevens and Hicks, but by the time Hicks gets there, it's already too late. Hicks arrives on the scene only to watch Benson's body get blown into space. Lukowski, meanwhile, is convulsing. It's clear that the gestation period is over. However, before the technicians can restrain him, Lukowski manages to grab one of the men's guns and shoots them both dead. All this while, Lukowski in his mind feels a sudden supernatural urge to live, to survive, and to feel the warmth of the sun on his face. He then shoots Horner, who is stationed outside through the observation window, and then makes his escape out of the facility while grabbing a robe on the way. He then hijacks a car from a couple and begins driving back to his house while mowing down everyone in his way. Lukowski feels alive. The wet, humid climate seems to please him, and his senses seem to be working on overdrive. Lukowski feels invulnerable because, for some reason, he knows death isn't what awaits him at the end of this path, and when a binational chopper tries to corner him, Lukowski swerves and weaves until it crashes into a nearby building. He finally reaches his home, and when he sees his wife in person, he instantly embraces her. This is when binational security catches up with him, and Lukowski does what he has been doing all this time. He kills them and then escapes with his wife in a nearby aircraft. However, by now, Lukowski's delirium is at its peak. His instincts have been taken over by the parasite, and instead of his wife by his side, he now sees a xenomorph and his only aim, to fly high enough and into the sun. However, this is when the vision ends. Lukowski is back in the lab, and before he can execute his plan, the technicians stop him from getting a firearm. They restrain him and watch in amazement as his chest slowly begins to bulge and bruise. This is when Horner rushes into the lab because he wants to witness this miracle firsthand. But after minutes of waiting, he is informed that Lukowski is somehow managing to delay the birth of the chestbuster. Naturally, Horner is visibly distraught. distraught, and he angrily confronts a bleeding Lekowski and screams, "What the hell are you doing? Don't delay it! This entire project depends on you!" And this is when Lekowski screams with a gurgling voice, "You want it? You can have it!" He then grabs Horner and hugs him tightly, and the emerging chestburster lodges itself into Horner's torso. Throwing everything out of the window and against everyone's better judgment, Horner runs towards the exit and forces open the blast doors. Everyone knows he is about to infect the entire facility, but all Horner wants is to escape this horror and inevitable death. Ostro arrives on the scene with security, and seeing his friend in distress, he rushes towards him. Not only that, when one of the security personnel tries to shoot Horner to prevent the facility from being infected, Ostro grabs his own gun and shoots him in the head. He then stares at the chest burster as it is lodged in a dead Horner and justifies his actions by saying that the specimen is too precious and that Horner would have understood his actions. Aliens, 1988, issue number 4, The Fate of Traitors. We now catch up with Bionational a few days into the future, and they have managed to capture Maris, and he is currently tied down to a gurney while one of the officials informs him that due to the Baines Amendment, he has been declared a terrorist. This means that he has no rights under American law. The company can do as it pleases with Maris, and it would be in his best interest to start talking immediately. When Maris is unable to move, he is informed that induced spinal blocks have essentially rendered him paralyzed. The man questioning him is ruthless because he tells Maris that he empathizes with him, which is why he is going to start with his feet, because he is supposed to be good with his hands. They then point a mirror towards his feet so that Maris can see what exactly is being done, and slowly they begin to mutilate his feet as the man forces him to watch. Hours later, Arona is shown the footage and is told that they finally managed to break Maris after 9 hours of torture, which was quite impressive. As the footage plays for Arona, we see Maris telling the men that he isn't scared of them because he has seen Salvahe's god. He has seen the incubation, and he now understands its power. We then see that all of this started when Maris was called into Bionational to fix a crystal switcher that was giving them trouble with their communications. He has been called in because the regular technician is out on leave, and once Maris was left alone in the communications room, he soon discovered cheap lead shunts among the equipment, which was likely a way to keep projects secret. It was an old method preferred by security personnel because it was a physical and temporary solution, one that Maris could easily circumvent. And when he broke off this shunt, he was horrified when all the monitors around him began showing the image of a xenomorph queen. While this was happening, Ostro was maniacally talking to the dead, decaying and mangled body of Horner. They used his body to feed the growing specimen, and this is when Ostro tells a dead Horner that he would have been proud of their progress. After a day's struggle, they finally managed to restrain the specimen, and as we zoom out, we see that Horner's body is in the middle of an alien nest, because Lekowski wasn't just infected with a xenomorph, he was infected with a queen that is currently captured by Bionational and is being closely monitored by Ostro. Over the past day, they have learnt a lot about the species. They have learnt a lot about the queen. She only exists for one purpose: to reproduce, and she is currently laying dozens of eggs as he speaks. After all, what is a queen without her subjects? Ostro's further conversation with Horner's dead body reveals that the board is ecstatic over this recent discovery. Their investment rating has doubled, and the marketing department has told them to hold off on testing so that they can promote the findings of their organic weapons program. Newt, meanwhile, feels lost aboard the Benedict. She spends most of her time staring out into space, and this is when Butler decided to shoot his shot. Over the next day or two, he slowly got closer and closer to Newt, and this is when we learn that Stevens dismissed Benson's death as a mere accident. Newt was surprised that the rest of the crew believed him, but she knew deep down that Hicks's mind was working overtime. That day, while they were eating, Butler was trying to hit on Newt again, and this is when one of the men, named Easley, mocked him about it. This prompted Butler to physically confront him for some reason, but Newt decided not to ask him about it. Over the next few hours, Butler gave her a tour of the ship, showed her their weapons, and even understood when Newt stopped him from touching her. She then eventually questioned him about his confrontation with Easley, and this is when Butler confessed his feelings for her. Newt had never known this feeling. She'd spent most of her life trapped in Fieldcrest home, and so when Butler approached, she decided to go along with it, and they eventually grew close to each other. Hicks even assigned nominal duties to Newt to keep her busy. However, when he spotted Butler flirting with her for the first time, he was livid. He reprimanded them both, and when he confronted Newt in private, a fight broke out between the two of them. Newt was still immature when it came to relationships, and so she ended the conversation by telling Hicks that he was jealous. She's not a child anymore, and Butler is her friend, her only friend, and she doesn't plan on losing him. Eventually, the two of them found a private space for themselves behind the engine compartment in an unused storage space. They would spend every possible moment with each other, and it wasn't long before they had their first kiss. Surprisingly, Hicks seemed to have known about this place, but for some reason, he didn't stop the two of them. We then continue with Maris's story. After he had replaced the shunt, he rushed back to Salvahay's church, and instead of facing any resistance, he was greeted by overjoyed fanatics who seemed to already know that he would be coming. When he rushed to Salvahay and told him that his god was real, Salvahay introduced him to his followers on stage while claiming that they all had been expecting him. It took a moment for Maris to understand. The vision had overwhelmed Salvahay and his followers, where he was seeing monsters. They were seeing salvation. And so, hours later, one of Salvahay's followers calmly walked towards the binational facility and, before the security could realize what was happening, she opened her robe and triggered a huge explosion. This blew open the front of the facility, which allowed Salvahay and his followers to walk through with little to no resistance. Guns didn't frighten them, death didn't frighten them. They were walking towards their salvation, and nothing was going to stop them in their way. They ripped the minimal security standing in their way with their bare hands until Salvahay was eventually face to face with the Queen. Like a true delirious maniac, Salvahay spread his arms wide and begged for the Queen to take him, to show him salvation, and seconds later, a facehugger leaped out of a nearby egg and attached itself to Salvahay. Before succumbing to the creature, Maris watched as the supposed preacher realized what he had done. In those last seconds, Salvahay regretted his demands, his actions, and for the first time in his life, he understood the meaning of sacrifice. When Ostro observed this over the monitors, he stupidly assumed that Salvahay and his followers were here to destroy the Queen, and so he rushed towards the containment facility along with the remaining security. Despite the dire consequences, Ostro refused to call for backup in order to save his face, and this is when he saw that Salvahay's acolytes had already been told what was to be done. Every infected follower was carefully dragged outside in order to make room for others so that they, too, could receive salvation. At that moment, Maris knew that they were all the Queen's children now. This is when Ostro burst onto the scene, guns blazing, and he began shooting the followers with facehuggers attached to them, directly in the face. This is when the Queen let out a primal scream, the scream of a mother who had just lost a child. Maris took this chance to separate himself from Salvahay's followers, and this is when the Queen attacked and killed the only guard who was accompanying Ostro. And as she confronted him, Ostro begged her to see that he loved her and that he would never do anything to harm her, and somehow he was able to communicate with her, and so instead of killing Ostro, she infected him with one of the face huggers. This is when Maris's testimony comes to an end. He doesn't remember much after that, but ever since then his mind has been riddled with one question: why me? And in his last moments, he comes to the conclusion that this was all planned by the Queen, that he, Salvahay, and all of them have maybe been a part of this since the start. This is when his conclusions delve into the realm of delirium, as he begins to speculate that maybe it was the Queen who telepathically suggested that he become a communications technician all those years ago. And this is where Arona cuts off the footage, and he is informed that Maris's body is currently being salvaged for organs. Arona isn't happy about this development because they still have to apprehend the fanatics who managed to escape. It takes 72 hours for the creatures to gestate, and if they manage to get out in public, one can only imagine the horrors that will be unleashed upon the world. We then see Newt and Butler wrapped up in love as they finally make love to each other, and for once in her life, Newt finally feels at peace. This was the first time she cried in the past 10 years, the first time she cried since what happened to her parents on Acheron. Stevens, meanwhile, is with the communications officer, Mika, who informs him that an unknown ship is approaching their location. She tries to sound an alarm, but this is when Stevens pulls out his rifle and shoots her in the back of the head. He then takes over and tells Massey that everything is in order and that they can get ready to dock. K-104 docks with the Benedict in the next few minutes, and upon realising this, Butler rushes out of the storage space while forcing Newt to stay hidden. As the rest of the men mobilise, they are horrified to learn that someone has sabotaged the loader mechanisms on all of their rifles. This is a setup, and this is when Stevens orders the entire crew to report to the loading bay. bay. Hicks and the rest of the crew are immediately apprehended in the loading bay, and though Hicks tries to call Stevens a traitor, to the latter, this has always been about the money. Massey smokes leisurely in a corner while ordering his men to double-check the ship's roster to make sure that everyone is here. Massey then reveals that he plans on using the ship's crew as bait so that they can transport attached facehuggers back to Earth, and this is when Stevens falters. He wasn't told about this part of the plan, and when he tries to talk to Massey, he quickly gets a gun pointed in his face because greedy men are something Massey can handle. But traitors? That's a different story, and this is when Stevens begins to beg him because, for some reason, he thinks that Massey is still going to need him, but that isn't the case for Massey anymore. The binational sociopath pulls the trigger as Newt is horrified to watch all of this from one of the vents. Aliens, 1988, issue number 5, Revenge. Newt is hiding in the hidden, unused storage space, haunted by the memories of her childhood. This is a lot like then, but this time, Newt has grown up, she has lived her life, and for the first time, she knows what love is. After much deliberation, she decides that this time she isn't going to hide. She is going to adapt, overcome, and survive, just like the aliens. Massey and his men think they know the creatures, but Newt knows them better. They don't understand fear. They don't understand anything beyond their existence, and Newt knows she will now have to become like them to survive. She pulls open a nearby vent and climbs into it to keep a close eye on Massey and his men. It had been 4 hours since the crew was taken hostage, and right now, Newt watches on as Hicks tries to threaten Massey for interfering with a government mission. Massey, on the other hand, is unaffected by his threats. The corporation has long been capable of sabotaging government missions. After all, he is still a firm believer in free enterprise capitalism. Hicks then tries to warn Massey about the aliens, tries to tell him what happened on Acheron, but the latter already knows. He has seen what the aliens can do firsthand. After all, Bionational is currently breeding them on Earth, and this revelation leaves Hicks speechless. Massey then proceeds with the next part of his plan. Hicks will stay with him aboard the ship to ensure his men are under Massey's control, and this is when Hicks questions him. What is the point of all of this? Why sabotage their ship if they already have Xenomorph specimens in their possession? And this is when Massey chides Hicks and tells him that Bionational always needs to think a step ahead. Xenomorphs are going to be the organic weapon of today, but in the next 5 years, they will be obsolete, which is why they are here on their homeworld, to study the ecological balance, to find out if the ultimate predator has its own prey. After all, in a balanced ecosystem, there has to be some sort of hierarchy, and Massey and his men are here to find the next step in organic weaponry. They are going fishing, and the Marines are going to be the bait. Upon landing, Massey and Hicks stay on the ship, while a couple of Massey's men escort the Marines to a nearby alien nest on hoverbikes. Massey's men get the luxury of wearing masks in the minimal atmosphere of the planet, while the Marines are forced to traverse on foot without any protection. Despite their pretentious confidence, Massey's men have their own doubts about the mission as they slowly make their way towards the nest. Newt, meanwhile, makes her way to the weapons locker and arms herself with one of the rifles. She knows Stevens was too prudent to get rid of the loading mechanisms, and she suspects that she would find them hidden in his room. While doing so, she continues to learn from her past. Massey and his crew were too confident in their abilities, just like Hicks and his Marines back on Acheron. This was a huge mistake. Ripley had tried to warn them about this, but they never listened to her, and now Newt was going to use the same mistake that Massey had made to her advantage. The Marines, meanwhile, trudge on the ground as Massey's men keep a close eye on them, and to their surprise, the Marines are unaffected by the minimal atmosphere of the planet. What the men fail to notice is a huge reptilian creature that just seems to have taken notice of them. As the Marines enter the nest, most of them are spooked by it because it is constructed of petrified bone and tissue, whatever was left of the aliens. Butler is the only one keeping them together, and he tells them to focus on survival rather than the enemy. Once inside, one of them gets awfully close to an alien egg because he can see something moving inside, and though Massey is excitedly waiting for the Marine to get infected, the facehugger doesn't attack. attack, and this puzzles the binational sociopath. He now knows something is very wrong with this mission, something that he could have never anticipated. This is when Massey's men on the hoverbikes outside are attacked by huge flying reptilian creatures, and though they beg for his help over and over again, Massey never responds. One of them dive bombs into the ground, and this forces the remaining three of them to land and retreat into the nest on their own while armed with their rifles. This time, however, as soon as they enter, one of them gets attacked by a facehugger, and the rest are soon attacked by Xenomorph drones. The ensuing gunfire is heard by the Marines, and this is when they decide to rush to the lander to arm themselves with the enemy's weapons. Newt, meanwhile, raids Steven's room and finds the loading mechanisms. Massey, meanwhile, smiles as he watches his men get mowed down by the aliens. They beg for his help, but Massey has different plans. His men are down while the Marines have somehow managed to survive, and though his superiors won't be happy, his primary mission is to prevent the government from acquiring a specimen. He sets up the remote destruction timer on the lander and then gets ready to shoot Hicks. However, this is when Newt shows up and orders him to release Hicks at gunpoint. Everything Newt had prepared herself for comes down to this moment. She knows she should pull the trigger. She knows she should be ruthless just like the aliens, yet for some reason she hesitates, and this is enough to give Massey the opportunity he needs. He drops his gun and begins to sweet-talk Newt as he slowly walks towards her. Hicks orders Newt to pull the trigger, yet she simply stands there without moving a muscle, and when she takes a step back, she trips over a pipe, and this is when Massey leaps on top of her. He holds Newt up by the throat, and this is when the true sociopath in him comes out. He threatens to rip her apart with his bare hands. After all, this wouldn't be the first time he has done something like this, but to him, Newt is not worth the effort, and so he grabs his gun and points it at her head and says, "You're nothing," a distraction. "Christ, you remind me of my wife." However, before he can pull the trigger, Hicks tackles him, and when Massey shoots in return, Hicks manages to drop to the ground just in time. Massey ends up shooting the control panel, and this window of opportunity is more than enough for Newt. She grabs her gun and shoots Massey directly in the heart, and as he lies there dying, he tries to antagonize her, but this time, Newt isn't going to fall for his tricks. She walks up to him and then shoots him directly in the face. However, Hicks and Newt both realize that due to the shot-up control panel, they can't turn off the self-destruct on the lander, and thus, Newt screams over the radio for Butler to get away, and she manages to save their lives in the nick of time. Hicks then cobbles together his own plan. He is going to transfer the nukes from the Benedict to the K-104's lander and then use it to rescue the Marines and the remaining survivors. Newt informs Butler of the same, but he and the Marines have their own mission. They have managed to recover rifles and ammunition from the lander before it blew up, and they are going to use them to rescue the remaining survivors inside the nest. They can't let anyone else die. Newt is baffled by the absurdity and the stupidity of this decision. The men that they are trying to rescue are the ones who forced them into this situation in the first place. She screams for him to stop for her sake, but this is when Hicks coldly tells her that she is wasting her time. The Marines were long dead before the mission was even put together. Butler then says to Newt one last time, "I can't explain it, Newt. We have to go back. I love you." Hicks and Newt pilot the K-104's lander towards the alien homeworld, while Butler and his men strategically invade the alien nest while keeping a close eye on their ammunition. They kill all the drones attacking them and manage to rescue one survivor. They quickly grab the man and start escaping, and as they near the exit, Butler decides to stay behind to provide cover fire. However, this is when a Xenomorph drone manages to ambush him, and with a swift move, it tears Butler in half. However, to everyone except Hicks' surprise, Butler is still alive, and that's because he's an android. He begs for help while the others stare at his open torso, and Newt howls at the top of her lungs in the lander. This is when Hicks reveals the truth to her. Each of the Marines is an android. They were practically created for this mission. It's the reason why they went back into the nest to save the enemy. It's one of their principal functions, to protect human life at all costs. They are cost-efficient, expendable, and they can't be infected. Stevens, Newt, and Hicks were the only humans aboard the Benedict. As Hicks is revealing this information, we see each of the Marines Marines get ripped apart by the Xenomorph drones one by one. Two of them manage to survive as they drag Butler outside while Hicks tells Newt that this generation of androids was designed with more socializing capabilities to make them indistinguishable from humans, which is why she was able to fall for Butler because he didn't know any better due to his programming. This is what Stevens was trying to tell Massey before he was killed, and Hicks kept this a secret all this time because he didn't want to jeopardize the mission. However, this is what makes Newt hate Hicks. He is just like Stevens and Massey, and it makes her stomach turn that she used to look up to Hicks. Despite this, as soon as they approach ground, both of them jump into action and help the Marines and Butler board the lander. Hicks wants to deploy the warheads before the takeoff. However, this is when the drones begin to tear their lander apart, and the first thing they destroy is their external feed, then the external controls, and then telemetry and launch functions. They are stranded, and while Hicks arms himself and gets ready to fight to the death, a much-needed confrontation ensues between Butler and Newt. Butler doesn't want Newt looking at him, but all she wants to know is if he knew that he was an android. To Butler, this doesn't matter. All he wants is to keep pretending in his dying moments, and as the others wait for the Xenomorphs to invade the lander, a huge flash of bright light blinds them the very next second. A minute later, the light fades, and the scuttling and banging outside the lander seems to have stopped instantly. When they step outside, they find that they have been rescued by a huge humanoid cephalopod armed with alien tech that took out all the Xenomorphs that were attacking them. Aliens, 1988. Issue number 6, Assumptions. As the remaining Marines, Hicks and Newt, step out of the lander, it's Newt who decides to confront the alien that saved them. Newt notices that it has dead eyes, seeing and not seeing, and when Newt utters the word "why" out loud, the creature begins to communicate with her telepathically. However, Newt doubles over with an overwhelming feeling of primal instincts, hunger, fear, pain, and a deep hatred. And while the alien communicates his feelings to her, it also peers into Newt's past, and for the first time, Newt is face to face with one of the most repressed memories of her life. She goes into a trance and, for the first time, refers to herself as Rebecca instead of Newt. She shows the alien her memory of the time she was 6 years old and the time she had accompanied her parents as they went out to investigate a mysterious magnetic surge on Acheron. His parents had found an alien ship on Acheron, a ship that used to belong to one of the creature's brethren. Her parents had ventured into it on their own while ordering their kids to stay inside the ship no matter what happened. Newt and her brother watched from the monitors as their parents headed inside, and this is when modern-day Newt takes hold of herself again. She corrects herself. She is no longer Rebecca, she is no longer 6, and though she doesn't want to remember, the memory doesn't stop. She reluctantly remembers what her parents found in the alien's ship, a petrified creature in a spacesuit that looked similar to their savior, only this time there was a huge gaping hole in its torso, a clear sign of a chest burster. Hicks begs Newt to tell him what's happening, and she says that the creature wants to know something. Though Newt tries to grasp desperately at the information, she hits like comprehending information from thousands of channels that switch every second. Despite this, she manages to put together that the alien was on some kind of mission. It had xenomorph eggs on its ship for a reason. However, this is when her trauma takes over, and she remembers how her father was attacked by a facehugger in the alien ship. She then figures out that this is what happened to the pilot of the alien vessel as well. He lost control and the ship crashed on Acheron. The eggs survived and lay dormant, waiting patiently for their next victim. The creature and Newt share an empathetic bond, and as she weeps, she assumes that the pilot was the alien's friend. Hicks and the Marines are now fixing the broken components on their lander, while Newt stares at the Xenomorphs and the new alien, coming to the conclusion that maybe the only universal truth is evil. Maybe the only thing that can reunite all of them is the hunger for revenge. After all, this unknown creature of an alien species had rescued them just because it hungered for revenge. Back on Earth, meanwhile, things are spiraling out of control at a rapid rate. Arona has currently barricaded himself in his office and is recording his last log. He tells us that after the attack on the bionational facility, they quickly realized that the alien queen was able to somehow telepathically communicate with other species in some sort of subconscious fashion. To humans, this subconscious communication manifested as dreams. They acted as a lure. At first, the company thought they would be able to contain the infection, burn every infected person, xenomorph, and corpse in sight. But for every nest and specimen they snuffed out, they found 10 more in return. They found hives all over Earth. The creature's lure had transcended class and political boundaries, and with each new discovery, the hope of overcoming these creatures dwindled. This is why they decided to destroy the Queen in their possession. According to their data, the Queen took weeks to reach its maturation period. They had hoped this would stop new queens from spawning on Earth, but Arona's assumptions were wrong. They soon learned that the creature's gestation period varied with the threat to their existence. It was a part of their evolutionary process. They were designed to propagate their kind, which meant the queens matured at whatever pace their survival demanded. People were infected all over the world. The spore spread through people traveling, and soon, in the face of the devastation, militaries all over the world staged a coup. At first, testing centers were voluntary, but soon they became forced and mandatory. Eventually, the military started using the pretext of alien infection to eliminate people who didn't agree with them, to eliminate political dissidents, the poor, and the disaffected. Soon, vital services across the country began to fail, and this is when they started receiving reports of infection from Europe and Australia. After witnessing all of this, after having been involved firsthand in this entire ordeal, Arona has now come to the conclusion that man is an animal, driven by animal passions. Civilization is just a pathetic charade. In the future, if there is one, Arona knows historians might blame him. They might blame binational, but he knows that the aliens didn't destroy humanity. Humans did it on their own. The aliens are now pounding on his barricaded door, and so before Arona succumbs to the aliens, he records what is happening right now on Earth in his logs. The military is evacuating vital personnel and flying off the planet. They are saving their own hides. Arona, on the other hand, has chosen to remain behind because he has finally realized that the aliens aren't sentient creatures. They're a disease like a cancer, and nothing can stop them from spreading. While Arona continues to record, we see that the military plans to detonate nukes once they have cleared the planet. Arona knows about this. He has sold them the false hope that this would destroy the creatures and that humans might someday be able to return to Earth. However, his only regret is that he won't survive to see his kind proven wrong. This last transmission by Arona is currently being viewed by Hicks and Newt as they prepare to take off from the alien homeworld. Arona now ponders on the futility of sending this last log out into space, and as the door behind him bursts open, he pulls out a gun, puts it to his temple, and then pulls the trigger. Hicks thinks that going back to Earth is futile, and this is when Newt makes him realize that they might be helpless. The humans might be helpless, but the new alien that they have encountered isn't. Eventually, Hicks agreed with her. He simply started to go through the motions. His training kicked in, and they left the alien homeworld for Earth, with the alien following close behind them. The other, as they ended up calling the alien, shared a common lust for revenge with them. And so, as they escaped the planet, Hicks detonated the nukes, destroyed the hive, and the other approved of this decision. Once they were in orbit, even Hicks was convinced they had no other choice but to go back. And so they boarded the Benedict, started the gravity drive, and headed home. This is when Newt decided to confront Butler again. And just like before, he didn't want her looking at him. But Newt didn't care. She wanted to know if what they had was real. And this is when Butler told her that when the creature ripped him apart in two, all he could think about was how much he loved her. But then he saw his own body and came to the realization that it couldn't have been real. But Newt isn't about to believe this. They all might think that this was just the new experimental socialization programming, but that doesn't explain what happened between the two of them. It can't. As Newt took care of Butler, cleaned him up, and hugged him, she realized that to her, Butler and the rest of the android Marines were as alive as any other human on Earth, especially after what she had been through during her confinement at Fieldcrest home. And for the first time since Acheron, time flew by for Newt, and before she knew it, they and the other had reached Earth. Meanwhile, on the surface, the General is informed that Benedict is in orbit, and is requesting permission to land, and upon realizing what this could mean, the general decides to greet the crew personally. The military has salvaged most of their equipment, which is why they aren't able to identify the other's ship. Upon landing, the androids were taken into custody by the military under the pretext of taking them to rehab. Newt enjoyed the feeling of rain on her face while Hicks tried to tell the general how Arona had all deceived them. He tries to convince the general that there might be another way to save the Earth instead of detonating the nukes, but the general isn't convinced. The military has suspected the existence of sentient beings since the Nostromo, but that changes nothing. They are outgunned and unmatched, and their only option is to retreat while leaving nothing behind for the enemy. Hicks gives in to his rage and grabs the general by the collar. He is offering the Earth another chance at survival, so why won't the general take it? And this is when Newt chimes in. She has realized that the military doesn't want to stop it. This is when the general reveals Arona's true plan, one that the military is following. The alien invasion isn't an attack on them, it's an opportunity for Earth and humanity to reset itself. They have been on the brink of destruction for centuries now, and to them, this is a chance to clean the slate and start over again. Hicks and Newt were both baffled by this, but Newt somehow understood their sentiment, and this made her laugh for the first time in the past decade. The sheer futility of this decision, because words had lost their meaning. She finally realized that the aliens didn't destroy humanity, the humans did. This is when the general is informed of a perimeter breach, and he quickly orders his men to take off just as they had planned. They have taken the Benedict into custody, and because Hicks, Newt, and the rest of the crew are now expendable, they are going to leave them behind, just like the rest of humanity. Newt is depressed. She just wants it all to end now, but Hicks isn't ready to give up. He didn't survive this long for it all to end like this. He didn't save Newt for this end, and so he forces her to her feet and begins to escape with her. However, Newt steps away to rescue Butler, only to realize that the synthetics from their crew have already been salvaged by the military for their parts. Butler was spared because of his condition, and Newt quickly escapes with him in her arms. Hicks, meanwhile, manages to find a cargo ship that still hasn't been retrofitted with automated controls, and while the drones slowly take over this last facility, they board the ship. They all take off, and we see the general ruthlessly order the detonation of nukes, while many of his men are still stranded on Earth. To him, this is a sacrifice needed for humanity, and this is when Newt is contacted by the other telepathically, once again. The other had now changed its intentions upon realizing the fate of Earth. It had begun to understand Arona and his message, and the other now knew Arona's twisted plan. Newt was naive to assume that the other was hungry for revenge. She thought it was hungry for vengeance, and they had stupidly led him directly to Earth. Newt realized that they had all been blind. The other's prime desire was to conquer, and now Newt knew that it no longer cared for the aliens. Its priorities had now shifted. The other now planned to wait patiently for the soldiers to return to Earth. It was going to wait for them so that it could conquer the planet, and it was telling all of this to Newt because he just wanted her to know. Meanwhile, their cargo ship was locked onto a predetermined trajectory to an unknown destination, and despite the uncertainty of their destination, neither of them worried about it too much. Hicks had had his revenge, but the cost was too high. Newt had finally found someone. She wasn't alone anymore, and that is all that mattered to her. Aliens, 1989. Issue number 1, The Hunger and Survival. We catch up with Newt, Hicks and Butler aboard the storage ship as they venture to an unknown destination 15 days later. The magnanimity of space was now lost to them, and the days were becoming longer with each signal they picked up from Earth, the further they went. Hicks was the one who was too focused on deciphering these signals, the one who was too focused on catching live feeds from the planet, and whatever they found only plunged them deeper into the void, just like their storage ship, which was headed to a predetermined destination. They would pick up random images of xenomorphs, videos of carnage, images of murder, and of course, last cries of help from survivors that had somehow still managed to hold their own on Earth. Some people prayed to the Lord while succumbing to the xenomorphs, while others held on and survived as long as possible while sending out cries for help deep into space. These cries would travel for centuries, traverse galaxies, yet help would never never arrive. That was the destiny they had chosen for Earth. It was a strange spiritual irony. The machines that had ensured the destruction of mankind were also making sure that their last moments would persevere in some sort of perverse immortality. Eventually, a few days later, live transmissions stopped, and all they received were static images from automated systems. Images of carnage, images of destruction, images of their nightmares, the aliens. People who had held out till now eventually succumbed to the creatures. Men who had held hope succumbed to their delusions, and naturally, this took its toll on the crew, especially Hicks. While Hicks was busy hanging on to the transmissions from Earth, Butler was busy trying to get control over the storage ship. He was anxious, jumpy, and he didn't like the idea that they were headed to a predetermined destination aboard a binational storage ship named the American. Newt, however, was busy observing them both, taking it all in and remembering the time she had spent with Butler aboard the Benedict. To her, that time was perfect, but now, every time she tried to approach Butler, he would shun her away. He was doing everything in his power to get control of the ship. He wanted to ensure that their survival wasn't at the mercy of Earth's automated systems, but all Newt wanted was a glimpse of the past that had helped her survive all this while. As Butler shuns Newt away once again, she leaves with tears in her eyes as her narration tells us that maybe Butler too was as surprised as the rest of them when he discovered that he was an android. He was the first man she ever loved, and the irony of it all was that he wasn't a man at all. That night, when Newt slept, she had a nightmare in which Hicks taunted her for her choices, mocked her for her decisions, until eventually his torso swelled and a xenomorph emerged from it. Newt woke up startled, and she knew this was real, even though it was a nightmare. She was familiar with this form of communication by now. She knew the xenomorphs were nearby, and thus she got dressed and hounded Hicks until he entertained the idea. Hicks reluctantly handed her a rifle, and the two of them headed deep into the storage area, the only place where the xenomorphs could be hiding. Their ammunition was limited, and when they entered the cargo hold, it was clear they were going to need all of it. A fire had been triggered in the cargo hold, a fire that had been caused by acid, and when they headed deeper, they found hibernation chambers that had been blown open, bodies that had their torsos ripped apart from the inside out, and a xenomorph that had been cannibalized by its own kind for the sake of survival. This area was hidden, cut off and erased from the map of the ship, yet it was here. The horror that they thought they had left behind had been their passenger all along. 4 broken pods, 1 dead xenomorph, and that meant that 3 nightmares were still loose on the ship, likely stalking their every move. Hicks and Newt instantly began to run, but soon they were face to face with one of the xenomorphs. Hicks had been depressed. He had been running on fumes, but this didn't stop him from putting his rifle next to the creature's throat. When he pulled the trigger, the creature was split in two, but the resulting acid meant more damage to the ship's hull. Newt was the one who snapped him out of his daze. However, as they made a hasty escape, Hicks was caught in the depressurized chamber, and the only thing saving him was the strap of his rifle that was caught on the other side of the blast doors. Butler worked frantically in the control room to override the controls and save Hicks, but by the time he was saved, the Marine was spent, injured, and bleeding from his nose. He was cold, delirious, and in no shape to fight anymore. Newt reassured him, but Hicks remembered his duty. There were 2 more Xenos loose on the ship, and they needed to be taken care of. And thus, when he reached the control room, he briefed the 2 of them on the equipment at their disposal. No motion sensors, no infrareds. All they had at their disposal were the ancient cameras, and when Hicks flipped through them, he found both of the xenomorphs patiently curled up in a corner, waiting for an opportunity to strike when it was most feasible. Hicks was losing control, losing consciousness, but in his final moments, he ordered Butler to open the aft doors, to override them, so that the xenomorphs could enjoy the same fate as him, the vast coldness of space, devoid of anything and everything to breathe. The aliens were instantly plunged into the void of space, and this is when Hicks collapsed to the floor. He was suffering from the bends, and as Newt and Butler wondered what kind of storage ship houses infected humans, Hicks told them that this was a delivery ship, likely one of Bionational's hidden propaganda missions. But just as Hicks was about to give up and let go, there was a loud screech outside the hull, and all 3 of them realized that the creatures had somehow survived and they had managed to hang on to the ship. There was only one choice now. Newt had to step up, and she drowned out all the protests from Butler and Hicks as she forced herself into a pressure suit. She armed herself with a rifle, tethered herself to the ship, and then plunged herself out of the vessel. She now knew the creatures creatures, she knew their patience was infinite. Their only goal was survival and carnage, and Newt planned on using this against them, or at least that's what she thought. Unfortunately, when Newt was near the main antenna, one of the creatures managed to ambush her, but thankfully, Newt was able to shoot it to smithereens in the nick of time. However, the recoil from the rifle sent her spiraling into space, and when she tried to get back to the ship using the tether, she found herself in one of the thrusters. A safe haven and a safe space that was, unfortunately, the hiding space of the last remaining Xenomorph as well. Newt had lost her blaster by now. The creature was on top of her. Hicks had finally passed out, and Butler had no choice but to drag himself over to Hicks's control panel in order to trigger the thrusters of the ship. Newt leapt away while narrowly avoiding the fire as the creature was burned to a crisp and sent out into the vastness of space. Newt had once again bested the creatures that had haunted her entire life, and she took pleasure in watching it burn to a crisp. When she returned to the ship for the first time, she realized that Hicks was fragile, just like her, and as she laid him to rest for the night, she realized that she no longer remembered how Hicks had looked when he had rescued her, how he had looked before the burns and before the creatures. They soon began to pick up coded signals over restricted military channels, and it was clear to her and Butler that they were nearing their final destination. All Newt wanted in this moment was for her nightmare to be finally over. However, little did she know that this was just the beginning. Soon, the storage vessel docked onto a remote military space station at an unknown planet, and when Newt, Hicks and Butler exited the ship, the entire force seemed more concerned with the cargo than the three survivors. And as Newt dragged Butler with her left arm and carried Hicks in her right, she was greeted by an angry General Spears, who was outlined by a dozen Xenomorphs in hibernation in the background. It was clear that Spears valued the creatures more than human life, and he was going to hold them accountable for every creature that was missing. Aliens, 1989, issue number 2, The Insanity of Control. Hicks is screaming. Another general, another military leader that won't heed his warnings. Newt is doing her best to hoist him up while trying to calmly inform Spears of their ordeal, and this entire ordeal is contrasted by Spears' accusing them of sedition for destroying the specimens that were meant for his facility. On the other hand, the narration gives us the perspective of Lieutenant Powell, the second in command at the military base, who clearly thinks that Spears is insane. Spears continues to accuse and berate our survivors, and once he is done, he orders his men to throw them in isolation while he decides what to do with them next. Hicks screams for Spears to realise that Earth has been lost, that their home planet is gone, but the general is clearly drunk on power, and he thinks that he can control the aliens. As Powell records his log, we learn that he knows that this would be considered treason by Spears, but someone has to document his insanity, and Powell has taken it upon himself to be the one to do so. We then see that Spears has hundreds of aliens in containment vessels, and every time he stares at them all, he mutters under his breath, over and over again, the word perfection. Powell's narration then tells us that though Hicks, Newt, and Butler believed that the aliens on Earth had been destroyed by the nuclear detonation, things were far more different than that. As Newt and Hicks are dragged into isolation, they continue to try to convince the soldiers of the fate their home planet has suffered. But the soldiers are simply following orders, and many seem to believe in Spears' mission. As they are dragged, Newt and Hicks spot the communications room where the tech department is keeping a close eye on transmissions from Earth. Contrary to their belief, many people have managed to survive, and a little girl whose family sends constant transmissions out into space seems to be of special interest to them. Once they are in isolation, Hicks tells Newt about the kind of man Spears is. He has seen these kinds of men before, men who think their military rank is the sign of a divine purpose, who think they are immortal, and his obsession with the aliens has clouded his judgment. Powell is observing them over the cameras, and his log tells us that though many of the men follow Spears' purpose at the facility, there are many that don't, and it's only a matter of time before there is open rebellion on the base. We then see signs of this as 3 soldiers prepare to go AWOL. They've smuggled rations from the base and they plan on seeking refuge at the terraforming colony on the planet. The 3 of them don't like this, but they don't want to be here to see Spears' obsession with the aliens come to fruition. They kill one of their friends who has control over the exit doors and then blast their way through it easily because the next security switch is 4 hours away. Once outside, they commandeer one of the tractors to keep off the radar and make their escape. This is when Powell is informed informed that Hicks is a long-time military personnel who has his own history with the creatures, and this is when we see Hicks and Newt being sedated by Spears' men. Once Newt has passed out, she has one of her nightmares once again, and this time she imagines herself being poked and prodded by an alien queen, while other humans watch on unempathetically. This is when Newt concludes that Spears is going to use her and Hicks as an incubation vessel for one of his specimens after all. That's why the queen has shown up in her dreams. That's why she needs her right now. However, when Newt and Hicks wake up, they find themselves restrained in chairs in what seems to be a conference room. Spears is now in his casual attire, having dinner, feeding on synthetic meat as he tells them that he is impressed by Hicks's record. Turns out, Powell's timely intervention saved their lives, and this facility was established thanks to Arona. Arona transferred one of the queens to this planet, and though most of the men feared the creature, Spears revered it. He started seeing the beauty of it once it began to speak to him through his dreams. He then walks towards Hicks with fake empathy in his eyes, and it's clear from his words that he values Hicks's experience with the creatures. We also learn that Spears thinks that the creatures lack leadership that the general thinks he can provide now that Hicks is here to help him with it. He plans on heading back to Earth with the Xenomorphs that he has trained, and he will be using them to take back their planet. This is when soldiers rush in to inform Spears of the 3 soldiers who have escaped the base, and he instantly orders his men to mobilize on the speeder deck with a full assault team. As he leaves to handle the situation, he decides to show Hicks and Newt some leniency. He gives them free access to his base, but orders his men to keep a close eye on them. Newt and Hicks are horrified by all the Xenomorph specimens around them, but Hicks makes sure to warn Newt that the only reason they are alive is because Spears values his experience, and they had better make sure to play their cards right. Hicks then parts away from Newt because he is planning something, while she decides to check out the communications room, which is keeping a track of all the transmissions they are receiving from Earth. When she enters, the officer is more than welcoming, and he allows her to watch the constant feed that is transmitted by the little girl's family we saw earlier. Newt relates to her, after all. 10 years ago, she was in a similar situation. The girl and her father record these transmissions like logs, like diary entries, as if it's their only motivation to stay alive. The father is resolute, the girl is scared, and though night brings along the terrors of the aliens, it also brings along devastation at the hands of the military forces that survive on Earth. The girl and her father tell us that at first they had hopes that the military would save them, but soon they realized that the surviving soldiers were just as bad as the creatures they were fighting. They had no order and ample power at their disposal. Their nightly runs were just a rampage, an endless fight against an enemy that never knew when to stop. We then see Hicks investigating the American, the storage ship they arrived on, and he finds the communications relay severed by the alien on board and realizes that this is the reason they stopped receiving signals from Earth. This is when Powell steps out of the shadows and confronts Hicks. He knows Hicks is just like him and that they both will need to join forces in order to stop Spears' insanity. The 3 soldiers who had gone AWOL meanwhile arrive at the terraforming colony only to realize that there is no one there to greet them. They figure that with most systems being automated, the colonists are likely sleeping at night, but soon they realize that the entire colony has been turned into a hive by the Xenomorphs. Soon they are attacked, and one of them is stabbed through the head. Though the other 2 try to fight back and detonate a grenade, only one of them manages to escape. As he makes his last stand against the drones, he is dragged out of the facility by none other than Spears, whose spiteful words reveal that he is the one who infected the terraforming colony in order to simulate the conditions on Earth to recreate the specimens created from infected humans. And so, after revealing this harsh truth to the soldier, he has him thrown back into the colony so that he too can become an incubation vessel for one of his new specimens. Aliens, 1989, issue number 3, Insanity. Powell and Hicks discuss Spears' insanity and what he has been doing while hiding from the rest of the soldiers. Powell tells him about Spears taking over the terraforming colony and how it has been turned into a breeding station by him. Only a few higher-ups know the truth, and when Hicks tries to retaliate loudly, Powell holds his mouth shut and tells Hicks that the entire facility has been bugged by Spears. His staff monitors senior officers 24 operate 24 hours a day, and when someone manages to displease him, they simply disappear within a few hours. Spears' madness has gone too far, and Powell is going to need Hicks's help to stop the madman. This is when we see Spears surveying the alien nest in the terraforming colony. He seems to be in awe of the grotesque structure, and this is when one of his men informs Spears that they've found a new queen in the lower levels of the colony. Spears is overjoyed by this news, and he ends up hugging a nearby egg without the fear of getting attacked. One of the soldiers tries to warn him about the facehuggers, however. This is when Spears' insanity is put into words. He thinks the aliens don't want to hurt them. He thinks the aliens relate to him because he too was born into pain like them. After all, he was one of the first products of the military's breeding programs. Meanwhile, the soldiers are getting uneasy, and thus one of them informs Spears that they need to leave because they have just been informed that a Force 10 storm is approaching their site within the next hour. Hicks seems to need a little more convincing to be on board. What was the method to Spears' madness? He gets that the man is insane, but how can someone believe that they can control the aliens? This is when Powell leads him to the communications array and shows Hicks the logs of Spears' experiments. Spears started off by quarantining the colonists separately under the ruse of a new virulent bacterium. Once they were separated, the Queen was brought in to observe while he allowed her drones access to the colonists one by one. These were lessons, and in the first lesson, the drone ended up killing the woman in the containment pod with him. Spears had the drone burned alive while the Queen watched, and this is how their training began. They forced the Queen to watch hundreds of her children burn to a crisp until she finally understood the message. The data from Earth told them that the Queen had an empathic mental link with her drones, and they were using this to their advantage to train them. Eventually, the Queen understood the message, and fire was the key to it. She had been conditioned to fear the fire, and Spears' lit lighter was the signal they needed to stop the aliens from attacking. Spears then began to train the Queen with more sophisticated commands, and every time there was a misstep along the way, she had to watch a dozen more of her children burn to death. Spears eventually created a hand-selected batch of drones that he believed could follow his orders. He separated them from the Queen and housed them near his chambers so that he could be near them and prepare them for war personally. To Spears, this isn't about taking Earth back. This is much more than that, and if Powell and Hicks want to stop him, the time is now. His vessels are already being loaded with the drones, ammunition is already on board, and once he is back on the base, they will be taking off within the hour. Thanks to the storm, however, he is going to be delayed by 5 to 6 hours, and Powell and Hicks need to use this to their advantage. Hicks knows what he needs to do, and he reminds Powell that this will be seen as treason by the military. However, to Powell, this is just survival. There is no military left, and they need to do everything they need to survive in these times. We then see Newt waking up in Butler's arms from a nightmare, and though she knows that she fell in love with him, now she has begun to question her choices and whether he really loves her. After all, he was programmed with these emotional responses, programmed to pretend to sleep, programmed with each human gesture and action so that he wouldn't seem so out of place. So, who did Newt fall in love with? Who was it that made love to her? Haunted by these thoughts, Newt decides to distract herself with the only other human she feels for in these trying times, the girl on the constant transmissions from Earth. The girl named Amy. Amy and her father are still hiding. They plan to keep transmitting constantly in hopes of survival, in hopes of documenting what remains of their life, and tonight, her father is going to give in and check out a rumour. They are running low on supplies, and rumour has it that there is a safe house near the First Insurance Plaza where they have plenty of food, water and ammunition. However, when they reach their destination, Amy's father is horrified by the dark nature of his reality. The rumour was just a ruse to lure survivors. It was spread by humans under the Queen's control, and they are forcefully capturing every human in sight and are feeding them to the facehuggers near her so that they can become the vessels for her drones. This is when 2 of the men ambush him and drag Amy away from him. However, the commotion is interrupted by a drone that ends up attacking all 3 of them. Amy manages to run away while her father succumbs to his injuries, and with his dying breath he says, "Keep her safe, Ray. Don't let them take her, please." This is when Hicks barges into the room and destroys the communications array. He then informs everyone that he and Powell will be relieving Spears from his duties once he returns, and right now they are to report everything to them. Powell will be handling communications from the observation deck, which is why they no longer need this equipment. Men who try to protest are held hostage in the conference room, and we see that many of them are still under Spears' spell because they have been promised unlimited riches breaches once they retake Earth. Hicks tries to get them to see the truth. However, this is when one of the guards is attacked by a man who is blinded by his greed. The rifle goes off during this scuffle, which ends up damaging the alien queen's containment pod. Wouldn't you know it, seconds later, the greedy man is stabbed through the chest by her, and as she unleashes herself upon the remaining survivors, Hicks orders everyone to escape, while ordering Powell to seal this section over the radio. As Hicks and Newt make their escape, the Queen claws her way through the blast doors and then begins chasing them along with her drones, who now follow her every command. Spears, meanwhile, is informed that Powell's the one handling their approach at the base instead of the regular officer. Spears finds this odd, and when he receives an automated alarm that there has been a breach, Spears puts 2 and 2 together. He knew there was going to be a coup sooner or later, it's just that he never expected it to be Powell. Spears veers off course and begins to jam the signals from the base, and this is when Powell realizes that they have been found out. Hicks orders Newt to run towards the docking bay where Powell has everything set up, and as Hicks fights the drones and watches them continue to attack wave after wave, he is reminded of his time in Acheron. There is no method to this madness. You don't stop them, you only survive. This is when Newt grabs a larger plasma rifle from Powell when they reach the docking bay, shoves into the Xenomorph's mouth, who is about to ambush them, and then pulls the trigger while reminding Hicks that she is done hiding and running. Powell tells Hicks that Spears knows about their treason, but Hicks holds Powell by the collar and screams that they need to get one of the vessels ready for transport because the facility will be overrun by the aliens any time now. Despite her bravery and confidence, Newt felt broken at this moment. She couldn't deceive herself anymore, neither about being brave nor about love. She could no longer remember her father or mother, could no longer remember love, and when she thought of Butler, she began to cry. This is when Spears' vehicle blasts in through the wall and uses a flamethrower to stop aliens that were about to ambush Powell, Hicks, Newt, and the rest of them. He then declares himself as the new master of the creatures, orders his men to get the traitors ready for execution, and to then prepare their vessels for transport back to Earth. Aliens, 1989. Issue number 4. Finish it. Just like Newt, Butler is struggling with the thoughts of his reality. He knows he should have known that he was a synthetic. If he did, he would have never loved Newt. He would have never made love to her. But now he was lost. What was the genesis of his love? Was it the last vestige of some programmer's sick, comic, erotic joke? Neither did he know, nor did Newt. He gets up from his bed, and when he checks out what's going on in the facility, he finds Newt, Hicks, and Powell being captured by Spears while he indulges in his insanity. When Newt tries to tell him that he is crazy, Spears grabs her by the face and mocks her for thinking that her attempt at treason would have ever worked. Spears' men use the flamethrower to control the horde and keep the drones at bay, while Spears orders his men to prepare for takeoff. The time for war is here, and he knows that his alien soldiers are itching to get their hands dirty. Spears delusionally claims that the alien creatures are their salvation. They have cleansed the earth of humanity that was destroying it, and now it's their turn to recapture it and create a new world where he is the new master. He then orders his men to throw Newt, Hicks, and Powell into the breeding center so that they can be used as fodder by the rejected creatures. And this is when Butler realizes that he needs to do something to help his friends. He crawls through the facility using his hands while making his way to the southern quadrant, where the auxiliary control room is located. Every inch of the facility was covered in bodies and aliens, yet none of the creatures paid any attention to him. Butler wasn't a threat to them, and he was able to make his way to the southern control room as men and women were actively slaughtered all around him. This made Butler realize how wrong Spears was in his assumptions. He thought he had taught the Queen fear. He thought he could control her and her drones, but in reality, he had just taught them the virtue of patience. Spears' men lead our protagonists into the breeding chamber, but hesitate before heading too deep into the facility for fear of getting attacked. This is when Powell tries to swipe one of the men's handguns, which gets him shot in the face at point-blank range. Hicks tries to reason with the men, but they decide to kill them right here and right now so that they don't have to go deeper into the facility. However, this is when Hicks spots Xenomorphs on the roof, which distracts one of the men, and he uses this chance to tackle him. However, Hicks is quickly kicked away by him in the other direction, and as they get attacked by the drones, the blast doors between them are sealed shut. This is an emergency seal, and this can only be triggered from the control room. It doesn't doesn't take long for Hicks and Newt to realize that Butler is helping them. Newt feels terrible for leaving him behind. She wants to go find him, but Hicks knows that they don't have long. If they have to survive, they need to make their move this instant, and unfortunately, that means leaving Butler behind. Hicks and Newt monitor Spears' ship as the soldiers finish the last bit of preparations. They then switch over to cockpit controls, and this is when Newt and Hicks make their move. They blast their way through the guarding soldiers and into the loading bay, only to realize that the ship is already taking off. The soldiers realize that their delusional leader is leaving without them. All the promises of unlimited riches were a lie, and Spears had planned to leave them behind since the start. They begin aimlessly firing at the vessel, and this is when Spears puts his head down and triggers the thruster. The ensuing flames kill every soldier in sight, and once they are in space, Hicks and Newt finally come to terms with how insane and ruthless Spears is. They both are scared at this moment, and while they take a few minutes to catch their breath, Spears prepares for their assault. He knows they are on board, but instead of facing them head-on, he welds the door to the cockpit completely shut. Hicks and Newt bang at the door, try the controls, but it simply won't budge, and instead of confronting them, Spears decides to completely ignore them, as if they aren't aboard his ship in the first place. Thus, the first few days passed with Hicks trying to find a way to get control of the ship to no avail, and once he had exhausted all logic, Hicks resorted to pure rage. He fired at the cockpit door mercilessly, but Spears simply ignored him as always. The door was designed to withstand depressurization. Hicks knew that, but this was the only thing he could do. Spears, meanwhile, was spending his waking days drugged on his supplements while cocooned in his safe space. At least they had access to the communications equipment, and this allowed them to receive Butler's final message days later. The message was addressed to Newt, and he confesses that he too has been trying to find a reason to justify what happened between them, considering he was a synthetic. But just like life, he has come to the conclusion that their love just happened. It can't be explained. An alien lurks above Butler menacingly, and in his last moments he says, "There is only one perfect truth I know, Newt. I love you, I will always love you, and I hope one day you will forgive me." This is when his transmission is abruptly cut off, and Newt is once again plunged into the depths of her depression. However, that night they are contacted by the Gateway space station that orbits Earth. They are warned about the horrors awaiting them on the surface, and this is when Hicks decides to take his chances. If he is going to die, he is going to die on his own terms and not at the whim of Spears. He drags Newt into an escape pod, and though they suspect that Spears may have sabotaged it as well, they no longer care. Spears watches the escape pod leave and make its way to the Gateway space station, but he does nothing to stop them. In fact, he is glad they are gone. It's now him and his soldiers alone, and they are going to wage the war that, in his mind, he was born for. As Spears descends, he dresses himself in his most decorated military outfit, grabs a sword in one hand and a rifle in another, and gets ready to wage war on the aliens on Earth. He frees his drones upon landing, holds his sword up high and screams, "Attack!" But the drones don't attack. They all stare at him and slowly stalk him, and thus, in retaliation, Spears decapitates one of them. However, this destroys his sword and burns away part of his hand, and within minutes, his own trained drones begin attacking him one by one. He fights against them the best he can, but this is when he is ambushed by one of the queens on the surface, and in his dying moments, he realizes that she used him to get her children back on Earth. Spears' revolution ends before it begins, while Newt and Hicks thankfully manage to safely dock at the Gateway. Upon deboarding, they are briefed on what is happening on Earth. The station regularly monitors transmissions from the planet, and this is when Newt learns that thankfully Amy and her father are still alive. They seem to know about the space station and are trying to find a vessel to get off the planet while keeping them informed, and right now their latest transmission is showing the space station the nest the Xenomorphs are building in their city. This is when someone in the background says, "This reminds me of another time years ago, another little girl lost in a world swarming with the alien bastards." Newt instantly knows who this is. It's Ripley, and she is tired of watching. It's time that they combine their forces and finish the job. Aliens, 1990, issue number 1, The Cost of Knowing. This issue starts by telling us about Rebecca's past, how she lost her family on Acheron, and how she hid under the facility for days while everyone around her was slaughtered by the aliens. Eventually, the Marines arrived. Hicks and Ripley rescued her, and in that moment, in Ripley's arms, she felt safe. Trusting again was hard for the little child, but she did begin to trust again. She trusted Hicks and Ripley. However, when she woke up on Earth, she learned that Ripley had abandoned her. She spent the next 10 years in a medical facility where she was kept sedated for most of her waking days. She would have died there if Hicks hadn't rescued her, but by then, Rebecca had died, and a frightened, lonely survivor named Newt had taken her place. However, now that Ripley was back again in front of her aboard the Gateway station, all these memories had resurfaced, and Newt was pissed off to say the least. She confronts Ripley, demands answers, but Ripley simply tells her that she doesn't owe Newt an explanation. After all, she was just doing her job. But this is when Newt's anger is unleashed, and she slaps Ripley. She deserves answers, and this is when Ripley tells her that she didn't want to leave her, but she didn't have a choice. Once they were in stasis, Ripley was woken up 3 days later by a man named Hankerson. He was from the company, and he was here to inform Ripley that her contract with the company wasn't over yet. She was going to lead them back to LV 426, and she was going to help them recover information from the derelict alien ship that had been discovered by them. She is then shown footage of the craft, footage that was recorded by Dallas, Kane and Lambert, footage that the synthetic aboard had managed to upload to the escape pod, which allowed the company to recover it. This is when Ripley realized that the company had always known about the aliens, and they were going to do everything in their power to weaponize everything they could get their hands on. The company assumes that the alien creature found aboard the derelict ship was a sentient being, a pilot of sorts, which is why they are going to go back and recover all the navigation data from the ship. Ripley warns Hankerson that this would just end in a massacre, but he isn't about to take no for an answer, and when Ripley puts her foot down, he threatens to wake up Hicks and Newt so that they can accompany her on this mission as well. Ripley cared for Newt, cared enough to leave her behind. Hankerson allowed the Sulaco to continue its journey back to Earth while Ripley went with them aboard the Harrison after wishing a sleeping Newt one last goodbye. Aboard the Harrison, she was introduced to the new Marines, her new crew, ones she kept her distance from because she knew they were all going to die in the end. The Marines consisted of Falk, Tully, Masters and Olney. They all knew Ripley thought of them as fodder, but Tully was especially vocal that she wanted to prove Ripley wrong. Ripley didn't mind the enthusiasm. She simply knew that the Marines didn't know what they were up against. They thought their fancy weapons and otherworldly bravado could save them, but she knew they had no idea what they were up against. After arriving in orbit, Hankerson and the rest, along with Ripley, boarded a lander and headed for the surface. Upon reaching it, Hankerson ordered the Marines and Ripley to get to the derelict ship in an APC while he stayed aboard the lander. Ripley knew he was saving his own ass, but when he ordered her to stay aboard the APC while the Marines headed inside, Ripley realized that the company still valued her. Once face to face with the alien technology, the Marines finally realized what Ripley was talking about, what she was warning them about, and this is when they picked up movement 50 feet away on the motion detector, and Ripley instantly ordered them to get out. Hankerson had different orders, and the connection to the lander was shoddy due to the alien technology around them. The Marines decided to pretend they didn't hear Hankerson's orders, but before they could leave, Masters distractedly fell into a hole in the alien ship. His fall broke his legs and a couple of fingers, and while the Marines decided how to proceed next, Ripley realized that the fall had triggered some sort of electromagnetic synthesis that she never understood. All she knew was the dying information recorded by the alien pilot, information that snaked through Master's radio and aboard the APC. It then reconfigured the computers to understand and display a new language. When Ripley laid her eyes on it, it took over her mind. This was all that was left of the dying pilot's mind, and it was now taking over her. It spoke to her, and Ripley was lost in a trance. She neither responded to Hankerson nor the Marines because she was currently being flooded with information. She was shown telemetry data, star charts, tangential reference points, all leading to the alien genesis. And then she was shown her, the true queen, the alien mother queen, and Ripley learned that the aliens moved with purpose. And right now, their mother queen was calling them home. Meanwhile, Olney tried to rescue Masters from the pit, only to be stabbed through the head by one of the Xenomorph's inner jaws. Tully and Falk stared in horror as they realized that they had been been ambushed. They began to fight back, only to be surrounded by dozens of drones on all sides. The screams of the Marines are what snapped Ripley back, and this is when Hankerson came rushing into the APC to check on her. Ripley told him everything she had seen and how she knew where the alien Genesis world was, and this is when Hankerson revealed his true plan. The aim was always to get the telemetry data. The Marines were just fodder for the aliens. They were to be brought back as specimens once they were infected, and he implores Ripley to escape with him because the information in her head is worth trillions. He begins to drag Ripley away against her will. However, this is when Falk and Tully shoot him to smithereens. They managed to survive, and they heard everything he said, and thus the three of them decided to escape the planet on their own using the lander. Once they took off, they blew up the APC to make sure that the company wouldn't get their hands on the telemetry data. After that, they were fugitives. Ripley and the two of them lived out the next few years in one of the outer colonies. Against all of Ripley's prayers, the company eventually managed to get their hands on the Xenomorphs, which eventually led to the destruction of Earth, which is why she is now here to save them. Hicks finds the story quite touching, but he still doesn't know how she plans on saving the entire planet. And this is when Falk and Tully reveal themselves and the plan. They will go to the Genesis world and capture the Mother Queen, bring her back to Earth, lure every alien to a specific location, and then blow them all to smithereens. Aliens, 1990, issue number 2, Faith. We begin the issue with Newt nightmares. Nightmares where she isn't rescued by Ripley on Acheron. Instead, she succumbs to the aliens. She screams and yells, but every night she gets infected by a facehugger, and then she dreams of her. Every time she sees her, waiting patiently and calling out to her, the Mother Queen. By night, she is the monster that consumes Newt, and by day, she is the one who waits for her patiently. We then catch up with Amy and her father Ben on Earth as Paul, their new accomplice, sets up transmission equipment on the surface and then returns to them underground. Paul is losing hope and getting frustrated with each passing day, and Ben isn't doing any better. Yet for the sake of his daughter, he does his best to keep it together because Amy's young mind has been trying to justify their life in its own way. She remembers her mother. She dreams of her. Her mother tells her to be a good girl, but Amy thinks that the aliens are attacking them because she has been a bad girl. Ben does his best to reassure his daughter, but his constant back and forth with Paul doesn't help their case. Their conversation also reveals that Ben is low on ammunition. In fact, he only has 3 shots. 3 shots he is saving for the 3 of them in case the worst happens. Back on the Gateway space station, Newt is informed that they have a new transmission from Earth over Earth Sat-19, which is used by Amy and her father, and she quickly rushes out of her room to check it out. This is a pre-recorded message, and in the footage, Amy's father tells them how the creatures have taken to the underground and have completely turned the tunnels and sewers into a part of their hive. Every branching tunnel seems to lead to a central hub like the spokes of a wheel, and that is where the 3 of them are currently headed. They also convey what they have learned about the survivors and the Queen over the past few weeks. The Queen telepathically influences humans into becoming her slaves, and most end up giving in. They capture humans and forcefully infect them in order to appease her. As they near the central hub, they find more and more bodies embedded in the walls, and in the hub they find an alien queen, waiting, completely unprotected with no drones in sight. The 3 of them don't know what to make of it, and before things get worse, Ben decides to call it, and they start to leave. However, this is when one of the men, who is still trapped in the walls, manages to grab hold of him while deliriously claiming that the Queen is calling out to all of them. It is their salvation, and the 3 of them should give up their dreams of survival. Paul helps Ben escape in the nick of time because that very second, a chest burster emerges from the embedded body. This is when little Amy angrily shoots all 3 shots in her father's handgun at the newborn creature because she is too frustrated and she wants to be left alone. This is where the transmission and Newt's heart sink to the bottom of her stomach because she fears the worst. She rushes to her room, finds the only photograph of her parents, and then stares at it. Amy was just like her, and just like Ripley, she wasn't going to let her die. Hicks, meanwhile, is debating meeting with Ripley. He can't believe she wants to go back into space to find the creature's homeworld, all based on some dream she had years ago. According to Ripley, they have no other choice, but this doesn't convince Hicks. He has never been a man of faith, and frankly, Ripley doesn't blame him. But Ripley doesn't have a better explanation for him, or Newt, who has now joined the conversation. All Ripley knows is that she has been haunted by the Queen Mother in her nightmares each night. Until now, she has always hoped the visions would stop, but now she realizes why she had them in the first place, and according to her, it was so that she could save Earth. Lost by this entire conversation, Hicks asks for Newt's opinion, and though she doesn't reveal that she has the same nightmares, she does tell Hicks that she is going to go along with Ripley's plan. She doesn't have a choice anymore because this isn't about her anymore. We then see Falk and Tully overseeing the retrofitting of a lander with a gravity drive and a mysterious cargo bay at the orders of Ripley. She has told no one what her plan is, and people aboard the space station are coming up with their own conspiracies. Falk and Tully then retreat into the classified storage spaces of the ship to retrieve xenomorph bodies that had been brought aboard for biological research and weapons testing when they still had hope. But Ripley plans on using these bodies in her own way. We then see her working on the ship on her own, while Hicks watches the final report of his old vessel, the Sulaco, alone. He is reminded of his crew, his friends who lost their lives, and once the image of an alien appears on screen, Hicks throws his glass at it. The hunger for revenge is ignited again, and while Captain McQuaid is forcing Ripley to find a qualified pilot for her retrofitted ship, Hicks shows up. Flying a gravity drive ship is no joke. It requires special training, and Hicks is the only qualified personnel aboard the space station. Thankfully for them, he has changed his mind and now wants to accompany Ripley on her mission. Ripley is surprised by his sudden change of mind, but decides not to probe him just yet. Hours later, they are ready for takeoff. Newt takes one last look at Earth and promises Amy that she will be back very soon. We then see that Ripley has recruited the remaining military contingent on the space station for her mission under the pretext of offering them revenge, but most of them are happy to be on board because they just want to get off the station. Before taking off, Ripley questions Hicks. She wants to know what made him change his mind, and all Hicks can tell her is that this is all he has. Even if they are Ripley's dreams and his nightmares, it's all he has to fight for, and so the retrofitted vessel takes off, and days later, once everyone has grown used to each other, Ripley briefs them on the mission. She tells them about the Mother Queen, how the creatures were supposed to function as a hive with the Mother Queen at the centre. They were never supposed to spread, but they did, which is why the Mother Queen is calling her children back. They all have felt it, the tortured, empathetic bond from the aliens. And the plan is simple. They can't take the Mother Queen's children to her, so they will bring her to them. It's the reason why they have a modified cargo hold. It is acid-proof and is lined with xenomorph bodies to simulate the environment of an alien nest. They will use her to reunite her with her children, and this is when Hicks realizes the rest of her plan. Ripley plans to use the nukes Arona had intended for detonation against the entire xenomorph population once it has gathered around the Mother Queen. 2 days later, Captain McQuaid is called to Deck 3 by Officer Donnell. Earth is facing catastrophic changes. The surface temperatures are dropping at an alarming rate, and all of these point to someone terraforming the Earth. Not only that, Donnell has also managed to track the source. It's plasma-based, and it is coming from space. Aliens, 1990, issue number 3, The Capture. Thanks to the gravity drive, the crew reaches the alien Genesis world within the next few days, and once they are in close proximity, both Newt and Ripley can feel the Mother Queen's telepathic presence. Once in orbit, Newt and Tully discuss the futility of their existence, how Earth, despite being their home, was never their true home. They were always out in space, away from their true home, just like the xenomorphs. We then see that Ripley had power loaders cannibalized and retrofitted for military applications for the entire crew, after what she had learned from her experience aboard the Nostromo. We also learn that Brewster will be piloting the lander, which will drop the APC on the planet housing Ripley and the rest of the crew. Through his words, however, it seems that Brewster is just here to get the job done and make excuses while ensuring his own survival. Ripley, meanwhile, is staring at a photograph alone in her room, and when Newt comes comes to fetch her, she realizes this is a photograph of Ripley's daughter, a daughter Ripley never got to spend time with while she was adrift in space. Her daughter had already grown old and died when Ripley returned to Earth, and every time she has doubts about fighting the aliens, she stares at this picture. This is what the Mother Queen stole from her, and this is what she needs to answer for. Ripley then convenes with Hicks in the lander, who informs her that they have pinpointed the most likely location of the Mother Queen in the Southern Hemisphere, and though he would perform the necessary checks over and over again normally, this is a suicide mission, so they had better get going. Minutes later, the lander takes off, and after leveling out around 100 meters away from their destination, Brewster drops off the APC and takes off again. The terrain is quite difficult, and as soon as Hicks starts driving, the APC hits something, which damages one of the aft struts. When they look outside, everyone's eyes widen with horror because they are face to face with a cluster of 6 huge egg sacs. Falk, Carvey and Dunstan head out for preliminary checks while Newt monitors their vitals from the APC. At first, they don't think the huge structures are egg sacs. They're too different from the smaller versions they've seen before, and they seem to be constantly exuding a semi-translucent liquid, which they find disgusting. However, it also allows them to peer into the eggs, which is exactly what Carvey decides to do. However, this is when Newt is notified about movement inside the eggs, but by the time Hicks warns him, it's already too late. The egg splits open, a Queen's Guard jumps out of it and instantly decapitates Carvey. Hicks and Newt are horrified by this new alien, and they can only imagine how much it might have evolved on its homeworld. After finishing off Carvey, the guard vanishes into the shadows, and while Falk and Dunstan look around, it ambushes the latter and stabs him through the head with its inner jaw. Falk decides to fight back and blows off the guard, and this is when Hicks spots movement coming from the rest of the eggs. They think it's best to retreat, but Brewster informs them that he can only pick them up from their drop-off point and not their current location. Ripley, however, has other plans. She spent 15 years with visions of the Mother Queen, and she isn't about to go back empty-handed. Falk is let back into the APC in the nick of time. However, this is when the guard chasing him manages to tear through the cargo bay door. Ripley blows the creature's head away and informs everyone that these are the guards and that they are trying to protect the Mother Queen. This is when the other guards begin ripping apart the APC, and they end up damaging its nuclear cooling systems, which puts them on a ticking clock before the entire thing explodes. Ripley gears up, orders Hicks to drop her off near the nest, and keeps driving. Before departing, she tries to convey a heartfelt goodbye to Hicks, but he stops her midway because he trusts her to return in one piece. The plan works. Ripley is dropped off while the APC keeps driving, and the guards fail to notice her. They keep chasing the vehicle, and one of them tries to ambush Newt and Hicks through the front windshield. Newt shoves a rifle in its mouth and pulls the trigger. This is it, Ripley's standoff. She can feel the Mother Queen nearby, but for some reason she won't show herself, and thus Ripley begins to scream, "Explain yourself! Explain Earth! Explain Nostromo! Explain Solico! Earth! Newt! Explain my daughter, you bitch!" And this is when the Mother Queen shows up. She is huge, and Ripley is too inconsequential to pose any threat to her, or that's what she thinks, because as soon as she gets close to Ripley, she smacks the creature in the face with one of her power loader arms. She then radios Brewster and orders him to get the lander over her coordinates in the next minute, even if he can't land it. As the APC is driving away, the crew is horrified to notice thousands of drones rushing towards Ripley's direction, trying to protect their queen. Things aren't looking good for the APC either. Hicks gives them 7 minutes tops before the entire thing blows up, which forces them all to arm themselves to the teeth and eventually abandon the vehicle. The crew makes their last stand against the drones while being completely surrounded. Hicks orders everyone to conserve their ammo, while Ripley uses the extending loader arm to attach it to the modified cargo hold when Brewster appears. She uses the other arm to grab the Mother Queen, and once they are in the air, she triggers the emergency retract, which hauls the huge creature into the cargo bay. As soon as the job is done, Ripley exits the bay, seals the door, and takes a moment for herself. This is when Brewster and the others inform her that the APC is about to blow up, and the crew right now is surrounded by thousands of drones. There's no way they can rescue them. Ripley, clearly enraged by this response, does the only thing she does best. She puts a gun to Brewster's head and threatens to blow his brains out if he doesn't rescue rescue them. And so, just when the crew has almost given up hope, Brewster lands near them and Ripley orders them to get in while she provides cover fire. They only have 30 seconds, and once everyone is in, the lander takes off, and seconds later, the APC explodes due to its failing nuclear engine. Most of the drones are destroyed, but more importantly, the Mother Queen is now in their custody. Aliens, 1990, issue number 4, moving on. Amy, Ben and Paul are hiding in a famous children's restaurant called Charlie's Cheese Pizza. It's full of dead animatronics and toys, and it reminds Paul of the time he used to come here as a kid. We learn that the Xenomorphs have finally destroyed power lines to the satellite links, which is why they haven't been able to transmit for the past few days, or for that fact, won't be able to transmit in the near future. Paul has grown quite delirious, but when Amy asks him to remember his childhood and play with her, he doesn't hold back. However, this is when a drone attacks them from above, and Ben manages to save them in the nick of time. Paul tries to escape with Amy in her arms, but he is soon captured by grotesque humans that seem to answer the Queen's call. They've been looking for Paul and Amy for some reason, and though Ben tries to save them, he is unarmed and is forced to flee in the opposite direction because dozens of drones stand in his way. He watches in horror as his daughter is dragged away by what can only be described as things that once used to be human. Newt's narration tells us that their journey back to Earth was quiet, too quiet. It was like the calm before the storm, and while she spent her time anticipating what was to come, Ripley spent all her waking hours staring at the Queen. Over the past few days, Ripley had figured out something. She had figured out that the Mother Queen was more intelligent than she could have ever imagined. The cargo bay, lined with the bodies of her dead children, did not affect her. Captivity did not affect her. She was patiently waiting for something, as if this were all a part of her plan. She knows everything. She seems to know their entire plan, and for some reason, she doesn't care. Upon reaching the space station, McQuaid informs them that the Earth is being reformed by an alien source, and while everybody panics, Newt reveals to everyone that this is likely being done by the Other, the alien creature they led to Earth from Acheron under the impression that it too hungered for revenge against the Xenomorphs. In reality, is wished to conquer Earth, but Newt learned about it too late. Despite this revelation, Ripley insists on carrying through with the plan. She doesn't care about Earth. Earth is the thing that destroyed her life in the first place, and the people of Earth manipulated her entire life, so she doesn't really care about the planet. All she cares about is revenge. At that moment, Newt knew that something had changed in Ripley over the past decade, something she didn't agree with. Her crew reluctantly agrees to go back into the monster's maw once again, and surprisingly, Newt doesn't protest when they leave her behind. This is because, even though she was informed that the transmissions from Amy and her father had stopped, deep down she knew that the girl was alive and that she had to rescue her. This was something Newt needed to do on her own, and so she prepared for her own excursion while Ripley, Hicks and the rest of them landed near Arona's bunker. Arona had rigged the nuclear warheads to explode in a sequential pattern, but something had stopped this explosion. Once the crew heads into the bunker, they find the detonation mechanism destroyed by a mysterious blast that looks more like corrosion than fire. However, none of this matters to Ripley. She orders Tully to attach a new detonation rig to the warheads, and then orders Brewster to bring in the Queen. Captain McQuaid is monitoring all of this from the space station, and this is when he is shocked to learn that an unauthorized cargo ship is leaving their docking bay. This is Newt's doing, and she has learned enough from Hicks to commandeer this vessel and lead it to Amy's last known coordinates from her last transmission. Newt lands armed with 2 rifles, and in the back of her mind, she can hear Amy screaming. She heads underground to Amy's last known location, and this is when the drones attack her. Newt fights them off, kills every last one of them, and this is when Ben grabs her and tells her what happened to Amy. He tells her how every last one of the creatures has retreated into the nearby mountain for some reason, the same mountain that houses Arona's bunker. Amy was taken there by the humans under the Queen's control, and he has been waiting for a chance to rescue his daughter. Unarmed, he had little to no way of rescuing her. He knows Amy is still alive because she still cries out for help. Falk and Tully have rigged the warheads. They will detonate in the next 3 hours. Brewster has dropped off the Mother Queen in the mountain, where the drones have already relocated. However, this is when they notice Newt's storage vessel approaching their location. Newt isn't a trained pilot, which is why, as they near the location, she ends up crashing the vessel, which knocks out Ben. Suddenly, Ripley enters the ship because she had a feeling this was Newt's doing, who tells her that she is here to rescue Amy and she isn't leaving without her. 2 hours have passed, and with only an hour remaining, Ripley decides to accompany Newt on her suicide mission. They both command the APC and then head into the mountain after wishing Hicks a heartfelt goodbye. In that moment, Newt knew why they were both doing this. To Hicks, this seemed like a suicide mission, but to Ripley and Newt, this was the opposite. They were both finding a way to live, and maybe little Amy could show them that. Upon entering the mountain, they are attacked by hundreds of drones, and though Ripley plows through most of them, the resulting acid eventually eats through the hydraulics, which causes them to crash. Ripley and Newt then exit the vehicle, and while Ripley provides cover fire and distracts the drones, Newt starts looking for Amy. Soon she finds the little girl, and as Newt grabs her and makes her escape, we see that she was being used as a lure by the Mother Queen herself. Before she can attack Newt and Amy, Ripley steps in between them because she now realizes why the Queen was so calm in the cargo hold. She already knew about their plan. It's why her children had already relocated to this location, and it's why she got the humans under her influence to kidnap Amy, because she knew that Ripley and Newt would show up for her. Ripley empties both her rifles into the Mother Queen, while the rest of the crew anxiously waits for them outside. 12 minutes remain, and they need at least 7 to escape the blast radius of the nukes. Once Ripley has finished off the Mother Queen, she catches up with Newt and Amy. She forces the two of them to get in the APC because she has a plan. The vehicle is equipped with an escape pod in case of catastrophic failures, and Ripley plans to use it in her own way. Amy, Ripley and Newt snuggle into the escape pod, and seconds later they are sent barreling out of the bunker with only a minute or two remaining. Hicks manages to rescue them in time, and this is where our narrator, Newt's memory, becomes choppy because she had passed out after the escape pod crashed. She remembers waking up on the space station with Ripley looking over her. This time, Ripley promised never to leave her, and for the first time in for what seemed like forever, Newt slept peacefully. A few days later, we see Newt journaling her experiences in her diary as a remembrance and warning for future generations. They have now realized that all of this was orchestrated by the other. It was the one who destroyed Arona's detonation rig to stop the nukes. It was the one who had called Ripley back to Earth. And this entire thing was orchestrated so the aliens could be destroyed and Earth could be conquered by it. Newt was the only one who knew this truth, and she decided to keep this to herself because Earth may have been their home once, but now it was time to move on. Perhaps Earth's new inhabitants will learn from their mistakes. Perhaps they may not, but it was time they stopped caring. The last panel of this issue hints at the Queen surviving the detonation and emerging from the resulting debris.